Super Rugby Pacific, round number 2, Friday games. We've got 2 games on this Friday. One from NZ, Highlanders, Crusaders. One from Australia, Waratahs and Reds. We're going to go over the 2 games, the lineups, some stats from last week, predictions, and you guys can let me know your thoughts on how the games may go this weekend. Highlanders, Crusaders is an all-Southern derby. You know, New Zealand's 2 South Island teams going head-to-head. This one is in Dunedin, so it's a little bit of home advantage for the Highlanders guys, albeit without a crowd. So the sting out of that home advantage, I think, is fully taken away by the fact that there is no crowd. These teams always, have a pretty heated rivalry, so it should be a pretty interesting match. The Highlanders did lose last week to the Chiefs. There were some bright spots in that loss, but ultimately it was a wee bit disappointing. The Crusaders looked pretty sharp in their match against the Hurricanes, which was a win, but remember they did concede a bunch of points towards the end, which will at least give the Highlanders maybe something to target. The Highlanders have kept their lineup pretty similar to Groot, Coltman, and Ainsley's the front row, Selby-Rickit, Josh Dickson, the locks, so it's pretty much the same type 5 as last week. Frizell, Lentjes, and Evans there as well. So it's a familiar forward pack from the one we did see last week. Aaron Smith and Mitch Hunt still the 19 combo. So your man Fakatava is still on the bench. It'll be interesting to see how much they rotate those 2 guys, because those are arguably the 2 best halfbacks in New Zealand. They're playing for the same team, so they both need some game time. But that's what they did last year. They tended to rotate them. Game by game. Umaga-Jensen's up from the bench into 12 this week. Paea is at 13. Timu is still there on the wing, and he was pretty slick last week, to be fair, for a guy who was making his competitive debut for the Highlanders. Sam Gilbert shifts to the right wing because Connor Garden-Bachop's into the 23 this week. He is in at fullback. Interestingly, they've got a 6-2 split. Have the Highlanders, they've put Hugh Renton in the number 23 jersey, so it's just Marty Banks and Folau Fakatava covering the entire back line. So fingers crossed for them. They don't get any injuries. Statistically, one area of concern last week for the Highlanders, 18 turnovers conceded is a horrendous number. They need to certainly up their game in that area. And they only managed 2 clean breaks, despite having, a bunch of game breakers. That they kind of weren't able to get that clinical punch on the Chiefs. The Crusaders, a little bit of rotation, but not too much. Moody, McAllister, and Jaeger, same Whitelock and Scott Barrett, same type 5, Matera, Christie, and Grace. So the same 4-pack as last week as well from them. Christie just gets through a million tackles, so you can expect to see more of that. This week, Mitch Drummond, interestingly, speaking of teams that have 2 halfbacks that they rotate, him and Bryn Hall have been doing the rotation thing for a few years now, and it continues. So Drummond gets the start, Hall comes off the bench. Opposite from last week. Fergus Burke was pretty impressive at 10 last week. He's still there. Havili and Eno is the same midfield. Fainga'anuku, 3 tries for him last week. He's on the left wing. Rhys up from the bench on the right. And Will Jordan did look sharp. He is there at fullback. So George Bridge is on the bench. Corey Kello is going to get his debut for the Crusaders from the bench as well. I mean, they scored 5 tries last week. So, the Crusaders' attack is just absolutely brutal. One area of concern, though, their tackling percentage was at 84, which is a wee bit low. I think everybody else was higher than them in terms of the New Zealand team. So, evidenced by the fact they shipped a few points at the end. That will be one area for them to clean up. Interestingly, the bookies have got the Crusaders by 11, so pretty comfortable favourites. But the Rugby Forecast algorithm, which takes into account home and away and the fact that the Highlanders are at home, but probably can't account for the fact that there's no crowd, has got the Landers by 1. Remember, the Landers beat the Crusaders last year, so stranger things have happened, folks. It's a 4-hour drive for the players to get to the stadium. It's going to be in Landers territory, so they could certainly use a win, but for mine, the Crusaders are big-time favourites, as they are most weeks. Second game is a pretty big rivalry in Aussie rugby, isn't it? The Tars and the Reds. This one is in New South Wales, so the Tars have got that bit of home advantage. Both sides had wins last week, so this is going to be a real good test of where the Waratahs especially are at. Remember, the Waratahs couldn't buy a win last year, and yet they've managed to give the Drua a bit of a hiding last week. So they are 1-0, but we don't really know where the Drua are at. That was their first game ever, so this will be maybe a bit more of an indication of have the Waratahs taken a step forward from last year, which we would all hope so. I think most people, maybe or were the Drua just kind of at a level not quite there in their first game? But we will find out. Same forward pack for the most part. Bell, Parecki, Harry Johnson, Holmes, Holloway, Cridge is your tight 5. Jeremy Williams comes in at 6. Charlie Gamble is there at 7, and Will Harris is there at 8. Remember, there's still no Michael Hooper. He's out with a foot injury for however long it takes him to get right. Lockie Swinton's also injured, so he's not available for this one. Jake Gordon and Donaldson are the 19 combo, so that was the same as last week. I thought Jake Gordon actually looked pretty sharp. And Ben Donaldson's kind of gone from, I don't know, seeming obscurity to be kind of Mr. Steady as she goes for the Tars. I don't know, he just kind of seems pretty unflappable, so that's pretty pleasing to see. I'm not quite sure where he would be in the pecking order of Aussie 10s, but all he can keep doing is just keep playing well for his team. Foketi and Parise is the midfield. James Turner and Dylan Peach, I don't know the pronunciation of that guy's name, are still the wingers. And then Newsom still at 15. So there's not a heck of a lot of changes to the starting lineup, but there's a few changes on the bench. Ron Smith, Max Douglas, Lungy Gleeson and Jack Grant all jump into the 23. Big Welshman Jamie Roberts is still on the side. Same jersey number as last week, number 23. Now, like I said, the Tars were impressive last week. They gave the Drua a hiding. When the Drua guys would have been fired up. They had 4.6 meters per carry, which is a really good number. Like anything above 4 is getting pretty good. So the fact that they were closer to 5 than 4 speaks to how effective their attack was. But 21 penalties conceded, goodness gracious me, that's way too high. It's probably double what they would have wanted. So yeah, that's going to be an area where you have to be careful, because otherwise the Reds are a side that can punish you. Speaking of the Reds, they've made a couple of changes. Fotuaika is there at loose head alongside Murphy and Tupou in the front row, so he's come into the 23. Blythe and Salakaia-Loto are your locks. Scott Young, McCrate and Wilson are the back row, so McCrate's up from the bench this week, which is pretty pleasing to see, because he's a guy who's a little bit been left out in the wilderness in terms of Aussie rugby. I mean, it's hard because he plays the same position as Michael Hooper. He is your kind of specialist poacher and work rate guy. So he plays too similar a game to the Wallabies captain to get a lot of game time at international level. But we want to see him starting for the Reds and putting his hand up, especially if Hooper's injured. It's time for somebody else to stand up and show what they can do. McDermott is captain alongside James O'Connor in their 19 combo. Stewart and Fluke are 12 and 13. So that means your man Paisami is not in the 23 this week, which is always a little bit troubling, because that guy adds some value when he is playing. Dalgunu alongside Paea, the wingers. Jock Campbell's at 15. Seru Uru is up on the bench this week, which is pleasing, because in terms of like dynamic loose forwards or lock guys, he is certainly one of those to cover. Statistically, last week for the Reds, compared to the 4.6 meters per carry for them, the Reds were at 3.3, which is on the low side, albeit in pretty bad conditions. So maybe that kind of is to be expected. Wet weather games, not a dry track, tend to lower the numbers a wee bit, but that's an area they would certainly like to bump a wee bit higher. And their line-out struggled. The Reds' line-out numbers were pretty bad. I think they lost 5 on their own throw, which is pretty bad. But again, wet conditions, you can kind of take part of that into account, but it would still ideally be a bit better. The Reds beat the Rebels last week, so it was a bit of an arm wrestle, but they got it done pretty comfortably in the end. So, Rugby Forecast algorithm says the Reds by 1 away from home, and the bookies have got the Reds by 5. So, by all accounts, the 2 away sides, the 2 sides in red, assuming they wear red, should be the sides getting the victory over the home sides in blue this weekend. But we will see, at least on Friday. You guys let me know your thoughts. How do you reckon these games are going to go? Can you see the Highlanders or the Waratahs getting a home win? Or do you think these 2 favourite sides from each conference are just going to do the business? You guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.